Welcome to Built with Flutter. I'm your host, Matt Carroll. Today we continue our work on an app called SpacePod, which helps me to download spaces from X/Twitter so that I can repost them as podcast episodes. Today we're going to work on one specific widget, which is this error notification up here at the top of the window. At various points through the flow of downloading spaces, things can go wrong, such as invalid credentials or a failure to scrape the page on X or Twitter, and we need some way to notify the user. We could do that inside the individual page area down here, but the vertical space is limited. We could increase the overall vertical space of the window. That would be fine, but that's more of a sweeping change than I think we need. Instead, the same way that toast or snack bar notifications come up from the bottom on Android devices, I think we can build a similar widget that sends messages down from the top. And the interesting thing for some of you, you may have wondered how you could achieve something like a snack bar or a toast notification. We're actually going to build this from scratch, so you might just learn some interesting tricks along the way. The first step with any widget is to kind of paint the simplest version you possibly can and then build up or massage it from there. I think step one for this widget would be to get a reasonably sized rectangle at the top of the screen where we can display what you might call an error message followed by instructions. In this example, your credentials were rejected. That's the error. Please correct your credentials and try again would be the instructions. Let's go get started with that. Under Infrastructure, I will create a new directory called UI Toolkit. I already have a file with that name, but we're now accumulating a number of widgets. So I'm going to do a little bit of refactor here. I'm going to create a new file, which is errormessages.dart. There are at least a couple of pieces that we know we're going to need here. There's the widget that actually displays the error message, and then there's kind of the scaffold or the overall screen level display, which will slide those messages down from the top to an area that we can see on the window. Let's begin by figuring out this message display. We'll create a stateless widget called error message. The error message will take a string for the error and a string for the instructions. Let's import widgets. And we said that we want this error message to be a rounded rectangle. We could get away with a decorated box for the rounded rectangle, but it looks like we also want a shadow, so the best widget for us to use is probably container. We can then have a decoration, which is a box decoration where we will have a color. Let's go look up the color. And we want a border radius. Let's look up the border radius. That's 16 pixels. We're also going to want some padding, it looks like. So from the top, it's 12 pixels. Looks like it's technically 11 on the bottom, but I think we can make that 12 in both cases. And now let's see. Let's get the vertical padding and then let's talk about horizontal. The thing about the horizontal padding is that when the message is pretty short, I think we would like a minimum width so that we have a somewhat consistent size. so that not every message is different in length. But if the message is too wide to fit, we probably want the error message. Well, I'll tell you what, just to make things simpler, we'll just have a constant size. How about that? And we'll let the text reflow inside of that available space. The width reported over here is 469. Let's just make that an even 460. Let's now get that widget on screen. Here we are in the kind of main screen for the entire app. Here we have a scaffold. Let's create a stack around the existing column. And then let's align the widget that we just created, which was error message. And let's reflect the example here by using this exact title or this exact error and these exact instructions. For the alignment, we will make it horizontally centered, and then we will make it near the top of the available space. Okay, that has now taken up as much space as possible. And so we need to figure out which one of these widgets involved caused the height to expand. Let's go ahead and add some text labels in here to see where the expansion might be happening and then see what we can do about it. Now, a column will tend to expand if we allow it to, so we're going to make it the smallest it can be given its content. We will then create one text widget that shows the error. We'll style it later. Then we'll show the instructions. Okay, now that we gave it some kind of content, the height has fixed itself, so that sounds good to me. Even the text that we're showing isn't terrible to begin with. It is the wrong color. It should be light instead of dark, but otherwise it's pretty close to what it should be already. Let's go ahead and create those text styles. The font family, where did I put fonts? Is it fonts? The font family is Comforta for each one of these. The error itself is white. I believe, let's look at the import material now. And I believe that the instructions are white with a 70% opacity. Let's look at the sizing here. Size 10 on the bottom, also size 10 on the top, but the top is bold. So font size 10, font weight, bold. Let's save that. Okay, there we go. Looking more like what we expect, though now it looks like we should add a little bit of space between the two lines. And according to our design, that's about 6 pixels, so let's see how that looks. Okay, looks reasonable to me. The vertical space maybe looks a bit much. Maybe we'll pull in the bottom space just a little bit, maybe 12 on top and 8 on the bottom. We also want to increase the character spacing. So let's try to get that roughly where we want it. So on the top, let's add 2 pixels of spacing. I think that looks pretty good. On the bottom, let's try 2 as well. That's also looking pretty good. Now let's adjust the padding. We will say only top 12, bottom 8. Let's go bottom 10. I think that's looking pretty good. Let's also add a shadow. The shadow that we have applied in the design is 25% black, a Y offset of 2, and a blur of 6. And now we have a nice little shadow around our error display. Now that we've gotten here, one can imagine that this widget slides down from above the screen to where you see it now, and then after some period of time, it goes back up. We also need to consider the possibility that multiple errors are triggered in a time period where they queue up. So we show one down, then up, then another one down and up, then another one down and up. That's something we need to deal with as well. But first things first, let's animate the appearance of a single error message. Given that we're going to want to be able to show an error message from wherever we are in the app, there are going to be multiple places where we want to bundle an error and the instructions. So we should put that, I think, in a single data structure. Now this widget is called error message. I kind of feel like the data structure itself should be called error message. So maybe we call this, we could call it a snack bar, but again, that means something kind of specific. We could call it a toast. Again, that means something kind of specific. We could call it a popover, but that's actually quite generic. It's tough to know what kind of popover we're dealing with. How about we call it an error message billboard, which would then allow us to specify error message, which is error and instruction. We can then have error message, this dot error, this dot instruction. And to make sure we don't do unnecessary rebuilds or repaints, we will override the equals and hash code. Of course, we've now just created a new naming problem for ourselves, which is that we now need a widget that displays error message billboards. And so in terms of metaphors, it's actually a billboard that displays the message, not something that displays the billboard. Without spending, I mean, if this were more of a serious app, I'd spend more time to figure out naming that makes sense. But in the interest of time and the specificity of this app, let's create a stateful widget that's called error message billboard scaffold, because you can kind of think of the physical structure that holds a billboard as a scaffold. This is the widget, again, that's responsible for sliding it in and sliding it out, which means it needs to wrap a child, which is essentially the content for the window, for the screen. Let us show our error message billboard scaffold. And in fact, really actually what we want to do is we want to come up here to the column for our entire screen, and we want to wrap that with an error message billboard scaffold. And then let's take this alignment that we created a moment ago. Let's get rid of this stack. And let's move this align. Well, let's create the stack in here. And then let's put the align right there. Save that, hot restart. Let's see what's going on. Okay, I think we're restarted. This is what I expected. No visual changes. Everything works, no errors. Coming back to the main screen, this scaffold now has the ability to show error messages on top of this child, and this child happens to be everything else on our screen. We put our scaffold below the material scaffold because it's very possible that from our billboard scaffold, we might want to look up certain material properties that are actually installed by the scaffold, and so we need to be beneath it in the tree. Don't know if we need that yet or not, but that's why I put it below the material scaffold. Okay. Now let's again just start massaging. We know we want some kind of animation, so let's create our kind of fundamental pieces here. Animation controller. Init state, super init state, slide controller equals new animation controller. VSync is this. Let's say duration is milliseconds 500. And of course, we need to dispose of our animation controller. So what does our animation controller control? As always, our animation controller is a value between 0 and 1. I think that when it's 1 or 100%, this is the alignment that we want. We want bottom alignment or visible alignment. And then when it's 0, we want to be back up, which is invisible alignment. I think those can be constants. I think we can say, in fact, we can make those static constants because constants should generally be static. We could say invisible alignment equals alignment still centered, but we're going to be like negative 1.1. And then visible alignment is the one we're already using, which is horizontally centered and near the top. The alignment down here can then be alignment linear interpolate between invisible alignment to visible alignment based on our animation controller. Now, what is this complaining about? Okay, for some reason, lerp is nullable, even though we always know that we're going to get a value. Okay, save that. Got a hot restart for our init state. All right, well, that's not what I was expecting with a negative 1.1. There are a few different ways that we could deal with this problem of the error message being partially visible. The core issue is that apparently this alignment applies to the top edge. And in fact, let me see if that's configurable by any chance. No, it doesn't look like it is. Let me see if it's configurable on the align widget. No. So we could build our own probably custom render object to deal with that, or we could also do something like a stack with a layout builder. But that's all really more complicated than we need it to be. If we were building a general purpose error widget, we would need to consider the possibility that there are many, many lines in the error. For example, what if someone inadvertently dropped an entire stack trace into the error display? Well, we need to do something reasonable. And certainly we wouldn't want that error message to be partially on screen and partially off screen. And so this approach here really wouldn't be appropriate. But given that I control all the error messages and given that I don't intend to drop an entire stack trace in there, I'm going to make this negative 1.5, and we're just kind of going to brute force it up. Or actually, let's figure out the minimum. Okay, so negative 1.3 is kind of the minimum based on one line of title and one line of subtitle. Let's take it to negative 1.4 to add a little bit of breathing room, and that's kind of a brute force hackish solution to this problem. But now let's actually watch this animation in action. And for the sake to be able to clearly see what's going on, we're going to make it take 5,000 milliseconds or 5 seconds to animate down. We also need to rebuild this widget when the animation changes, which means that we want an animated builder. The animation is going to be our slide controller. For the child, this is a minor, unnecessary performance improvement, but we can store our child down here. And then in init state, we will immediately start the animation. Let's do a hot restart and let's watch it come down. Okay, that's what it looks like when it takes 5 seconds. Let's take half a second. Okay, half a second happens very quickly. That's a little bit slower there. There might be some initialization lag because I have to currently hot restart it to do that. Now, one thing that I don't like still is that we're on a linear animation curve. And the thing about a linear animation curve is that it looks very unnatural. It starts too fast and it stops too fast. Let us create a method down here, which will be alignment get current message alignment. And we will return our linear interpolation value from here. Currently no difference, but here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to access the selection of global animation curves, and I'm going to say elastic in out. And we're just going to see how that looks. Now we probably need to make the animation longer in that case because elastic adds quite a bit more motion. Let's bring this up to 750. How about 1 second? Yeah, good enough. Maybe a more appropriate animation would be to ease in and ease out, but let's see how happy we are with this elastic behavior over time. Now the question is, how does a client actually tell our scaffold to show that there's an error? Again, number of ways to do this. The way that I would do this in an open source package is a bit different than how I would do this in a narrowly tailored app. In a narrowly tailored app like this, I'm just going to make our state class public, and then I'm going to create a method that says show error message, which is going to take an error message. And as discussed earlier, we know that we're going to need some kind of queue to queue these up, and we will add the message. Now let's create this queue for ourselves. then if slide controller, if it's animating, then I should say if it's not animating, then we want to say show next error message. If it is animating, we have to wait until it's done. If it's not animating, show next error message is going to say message. We're going to go to the error message queue. We're going to remove the highest priority, the oldest message that's waiting to be shown. We're going to have an error message here. And then if error message is not equal to null, we'll build the animated builder. So we're going to set error message equal to the next message that we want to show. And then we will say slide controller forward from 0. Let's remove our automatic forward call. We also, when we're done, at a certain period of time after we're done showing the error message, we want to automatically pull it back. So we need to add a status listener to our slide controller. We're going to switch on the status. Let's see. So there are only 2 of these that we care about. We don't care when we start. We don't care when we start moving forward or start moving back, but we do care when we complete moving forward, and we do care when we get all the way back. Or maybe, well, let me think about that. Yeah, I mean, on dismissed, we can say error message is null. And on completed, this is where we, I guess, actually want to start a timer. Now, timers are always a little bit finicky in Flutter when you consider testing. I think we'll ignore that problem for the moment. Let's come up here. Let's create a timer property, which is display timer. And then here we will say display timer equals timer const duration. We can make this configurable later. We'll wait for 3 seconds, and then we will hide message. Hide message means slide controller reverse, pull it back up. But this does also, what I just did, introduces a problem here. This is the wrong condition. When we want to show an error message, checking animation is not enough. Instead, we need to say if the value is greater than 0. So if we're anywhere other than hidden, then in hide message, we can repeat. So let's take this out of here. Let's show message if idle, and we'll say void show message if idle. And we can actually change this. Well, that's fine. Here's a second condition. When we dismiss, now we want to show message if idle. Okay, so now we've hooked up a bunch of stuff that's happening, but we need to actually trigger it. First, oh, this says it's not being used. Why is it not being used? I guess one thing we'll want to do is cancel the timer, and that'll make that complaint go away at least. Let's make sure that now that we're no longer running the animation immediately, let's make sure it's not visible. Okay, it's not visible because it's sitting up here at the top. Let's also change out our hard-coded values here. Error message, error message instruction. If we want widgets lower down in the tree to be able to tell this scaffold to show stuff, we need to provide the ability to find this state object. So we'll create a static method which returns an optional error message billboard scaffold state. We will use the Flutter convention of naming it of. We will take a context and we will return context.findAncestor_state of type. And this is the type that we want to find. Okay. Now I think we have enough to really try this out. Let's go to the main screen. And on the main screen, I have created some temporary kind of testing or debugging capability here. You may have noticed the short, medium, long. This is to help us test 3 different lengths of error messages and see how they go. Let's try the first one. Let's say error message billboard. Let me make one change here. Let's not define this in the state class. Let's define this in the widget class. Okay. And then let's say billboard scaffold dot of. And then let's say show error message short message. Let's see how this goes. Do a hot restart just in case. And then let's tap short. And nothing happens. Okay. First, let's put an exclamation here and make sure that we're actually getting the reference we think we are. And we are. So we're saying show message. We're adding to the queue. We're coming down here. Okay, and this is the opposite of what it's supposed to be. Maybe some of you saw that. Okay, still not working. Let's say showing error message. And we got some kind of exception down here, but let's see if we at least get that print statement. We do. Okay. Show error message. We get the latest message. We tell slide controller to start moving. Probably the issue is this right here. I think what we will do is remove that. We will then say, if the error message happens to be null, we'll return essentially nothing. And we're going to move the child back in here just to make sure that this lookup always happens with the latest error message. Let's hot restart. Okay, there's our short message. Wait 3 seconds, and it goes away. All right, but still an error. Let's see what's going on here. Invalid value range. Okay, so we're always calling show next error message, but we didn't consider the possibility that there are no further error messages to display. Short, 1, 2, 3. Okay. By the way, I wonder if there's a curve that will give us a different exit. Let's see. Elastic. Maybe elastic out. Let's see what this does. Still kind of, let's go with the good old ease in out, maybe cubic. Let's see if we're happy with this one. Well, that was very laggy. Let's try it a second time. Mostly it's just too slow now. So let's come up here and let's, I don't know, go with a 400 milliseconds. I don't know. None of these are really working for me. So we'll go back to elastic out. But now let's bring back for our medium size error message. We want that, and we want that. We'll copy this right here, and then we'll take this text, and we'll take this text. Okay. And now let's stack these up. It's definitely moving way too fast now, which I wasn't expecting because maybe we need a hot restart. Maybe that's why. That seems reasonable. We don't expect that many error messages to actually stack up in reality, so that's not too much of a problem. But let's see how crazy things look when we start getting long titles and long instructions. Okay, so 1, we need horizontal padding, and 2, we probably want to center align, or maybe center the, well, let's do padding, and then let's see what we want to do. Left 24, right 24, save that. Yeah, that's not terrible. I mean, we could center all of the text, but I don't know if that's actually an improvement. I think I'm pretty happy with that. I think that is a decent completion of an error widget with a scaffold that can be accessed from anywhere in the code. So what I'll do, probably off camera, is I'll go through and find all the exceptions and error codes that can happen in the flow. I will handle the error codes, I will catch the exceptions, and when I do that, I will hoist one of these error messages up for the user so the user knows that his credentials were rejected, or we were unable to load X Twitter, or we were unable to scrape the page, or we couldn't find the audio playlist, or the download was interrupted. Gotta hoist all those up to error messages and also change those pages so that when the error occurs, they bring you to a state where you can reasonably try again. but I don't need to bore you with all that. The cool part was just seeing how we create that widget, and now I'm going to go use it as part of my UI toolkit within this app. I appreciate you watching the video today. Please do subscribe to the channel if you'd like to keep up with what I'm building with Flutter. This channel is dedicated to building real tools, some professional tools, some personal tools using Flutter. I'll see you in the next video.